Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Spanish Love Songs called Brave Faces, everyone. I think it can get overlooked by some people sometimes that emo originally came from punk. Now, before you protest that, I mean more thematically in the focus than in the sound outright. In the sound, it's kind of obvious. During the expansion throughout the 90s, in comparison with more hard-edged political touchpoints in punk that the larger music industry would dilute out of the genre, emo's more introspective framing made the adaptation for the mainstream a bit of an easier sell, which is why in the pop rock explosion of the 2000s, it was much more easily commodified. And yet with the newest wave coming out of the 2010s, that hasn't really happened, not achieved in the crossover, even as trap and emo rap appropriate signifiers, or even some chord structures, and I've been fascinated as to why. And sure, some of it is linked to the whole rock is dead media narrative, paired with how, outside of Warped Tour, punk and emo at the most raw, never had a lot of easy radio crossover in the mainstream. But I'd argue there's a subtextual element as well. Simply put, specifically in the rise of Midwestern emo, there was a heaviness and maturity to the more thoughtful songwriting that didn't just wallow in easy relationship melodrama, part of which came from established acts who were hitting middle age and kind of grew out of it. But for the newer generation, there seems to be a greater societal awareness in both mental health and broader systemic decay. Emo of previous decades had angst, but mostly grounded it internally amidst waves of poetry. In the 2010s, there still is that angst, but there's less of a flowery wallow and a blunter sense of realism that demands a little bit of a greater scope and the stakes get higher. And that awareness, it's really been present across the best acts in and adjacent to the genre. Sorority Noise, The Wonder Years, Pup, you name them. And into that scene, we really now have to include Spanish Love Songs, a California-based act that I've seen drifting on the edges of the conversations for those in the know with a solid mid-2010s debut, but really smashed into the scene proper in 2018 with Schmaltz. And it brought improvements in more diverse song structures, more expansive grooves, and an absolute powerhouse of a frontman in Dylan Slocum, who had the trembling but powerfully emotive roar of a real bruiser. Think Dan Campbell of The Wonder Years, but deeper and a little bit more unstable in his vocal timbre. And the writing. I mean, take the unflinching, self-aware honesty of Max Bemis from Say Anything, updated to the modern era, and then barreling into the pits of depression, addiction, and a steadily expanding scope to look outside of himself. And you had an act that was on the rise in the best way possible. But I'll admit, after the excellent Schmaltz, I wasn't sure how much further the band was gonna go, reportedly integrating more synth textures, which can always be really hit and miss in emo. But hell, I could use a good emotional gut punch, so what do we get on Brave Faces, everyone? Oh wow, folks, I made a statement on Twitter that I was planning on including this album in On the Pulse because it might just be the best way to get this all the more exposure that it really deserves, especially when you realize that what it does so right might not demand a lot of words to describe it. But then I got another 4 or 5 listens in here and I realized I had a much bigger problem. I couldn't find flaws on this album, because whenever I got close, Spanish Love Songs drives another semi-trailer into the gut. This is an album that hits the same raw emotional territory as a Rustin Kelly or Lydia Lovelace or Def Havana or Jetty Bones for me, and then just keeps going, but with the scope to look outside of himself and cut to the core of what could well be a generational statement. I mean, I went in expecting a fucking great emo album, but what I got instead, what I found, I think it's a goddamn masterpiece, folks. This is something special, and I got a lot to say, so strap in. And I feel like I really have to start with that sense of thematic scope, because on the surface, it seems simple. You clench your fists, you grit your teeth, and you claw together some sort of optimism to face the larger world. I mean, it's an emo album with ultimately a positive message. I'm already getting on board. But Spanish Love Songs is not going to make it that easy, so they're going to throw the weight of everything and the kitchen sink into highlighting the impossible reality of our generation really finding that. Congratulations for trying this thing called happiness for a while. You're now dealing with omnipresent depression, exhausted burnout, and a larger society that will crap on you for expressing and exploring any of it in public. Or hell, they just won't even listen if you try. Your friends friends in your family, they're addicted to painkillers. The barroom has become banal. Everyone's the same there. Nobody really gives a shit about your passing hobby in a band. And let's be real, you don't have the money to support any of this anyway. Yeah, if you're looking for where Spanish Love Songs barrels into punk territory when it comes to emo, it's in the blunt observations of poverty that a lot of the genre in the past, especially the commercial viable stuff, didn't dare touch, because middle-class kids writing sad poetry was a much easier sell than getting priced out of your apartment, or the humiliation of dependence on family for money who are already overextended as it is, and then deluding them themselves that they'll be okay, and then the realization it's a systemic societal issue for your generation that's just not getting better beyond you. I mean, you're just good enough of a person to care, and then hate yourself for not being better. You're aware of the exploitation inherent in the broken system which you have to live. Every single bad decision you and your friends make will only compound everyone's misery, and when the world's only seeming to get worse, having any sort of vestige of integrity just cost even more. And yet, even in the face of all of that, everything that has crushed so many people into the ground to have their faces stamped on forever, be it through gentrification, to police brutality, to omnipresent debt, both medical debt and student debt, to the sad reality that it doesn't seem like anyone really cares to fix it, and some of the problems may be too big to fix, this is still an album that wipes away its bloody nose and its blackened eyes to get up and keep fighting and steel yourself for more. There's a raw, headstrong tenacity to Dylan Slocum's delivery, both soft-spoken and howling, where you could tell he's just trying to convince himself of the optimism and of that better world and living for other people that it's worth it. And the underlying desperate positivity means that you can't really scapegoat anyone either. Everyone's human. Even on songs like Routine Pain, where it'd be so easy to do so and find some sort of cheap release. Hell, people are only trying to live in bad systems, where for as much as this album will rage against prior generations' intentional ignorance and your own family's guilt-tripping when they aren't even trying to hear the explanation like on Generation Loss. Very next song's Kick, where our frontman sees his father shooting heroin and then talking about Jesus driving the kids home from Sunday school, where that drug trade becomes generational and he meets a friend he knows is using, and he doesn't have the guts to give his friend the 10 grand he doesn't have for any sort of rehab, even though an OD is likely in the cards for him. I mean, morality seems to change when poverty enters the picture, and same with medical health. Especially when on a song like Losers, he realizes he can't even afford the doctor for himself, where it might be cheaper to just die, where your family never really recovered from the financial crash in '08, and where they refuse to admit it to themselves. To quote Losers Part 2, the cost of living means it costs to stay alive. And what's really going to happen when your parents who have bailed them out time and time again die themselves? They've showed a consistent human compassion even despite their words. I mean, fuck it, let's just live for each other and not be the last ones standing. The last ones standing. And sandwiched in between the two Loser songs is optimism as a radical life choice. I mean, the gallows humor is pretty persistent here. We're in a world where everyone is dying on the outside. He's done dying on the inside, and he'll wear you out waiting for him to implode. And when you consider that an earlier song on this project is Self-Destruction as a sensible career choice, where all his self-doubt bulldozes through all his hopes in the face of missing bank payments. His dreams are like quick-drying cement that's sucking him down, and he probably needs about 30 goddamn miracles to pull this off. Pulling out some real vestige of hope, that is powerful. That speaks to a broader audience. That gets under your skin. And what becomes so stark about this album is that it's not all didactic sloganeering or abstract thoughts. It's not just going plainly for the anthem, which is where the greatest strengths of emo shine through in fleshing out the detail, the human vulnerability. He's sick of apologizing for emotional rawness, especially when those brutal systems will seek to grind everyone into hopelessness in a world that's short on empathy, where his poor friend's self-destruction won't be eulogized and nobody listening leads to the awkward memorial. It sounds like Kick and the fractured hospital scene post-mass shooting on Dolores. They got the sort of heartbreaking detail that rings painfully true. Because yeah, mass shootings, that's still a thing too in this world, where they're still praying for you. Isn't that good enough? Another example of getting talked at and never listened to, where you wake up and you're not feeling better and you wonder why you're still surprised about it. But you know the right answer isn't just saying fuck it, even when it's the exhausted, easy solution, the tiredness that fills this album. Because you don't have to fix everything at once. And it's not worth being conditioned to be broken. So let's live for each other. Let's goddamn go. It's a long life. Go for it. And if that's not an aspirational focus that can strike some sort of emotional or intellectual chord for our generation, or even those before and after, I mean, tell me, what's it like to have all that privilege and no problems? Goddamn. So, okay, stellar writing, fantastic thematic depth and detail, a heart-wrenching performance that really does cut true. What could go wrong here? Well, this is where I would normally come in and say that it is doing all this with a pretty by-the-numbers emo palette in the instrumentation and production, noisy pop-punk leaning grooves with huge anthemic hooks, sharp drum work, synth primarily as accent texture, but nothing on the surface seems all that revolutionary. But this is a project where not only is it mixed to amplify that shaky, desperate instability, but will also add a diversity of groove and melodic interplay and tone that will throw you off guard in the best way possible, like on Beachfront Property, while preserving dynamics and nailing the loud, soft moments to know to get spare, when to ratchet up that real crescendo. And I have to give a ton of credit to Gabe Mayashiro on bass here, where not only is he actively contributing a lot of those interweaving harmonies, a lot more than you'd expect, think Matt Sharp on Pinkerton-era Weezer, but he's bringing a sinuous, frenetic tension in the foundation that only ramps up the emotional surge when this album swings for the fences in the anthemic moments. And when the melodies are as crisp and bright as they are on the guitars, and Ruben Duarte's drum work is explosive, but ever so slightly off kilter, especially when he gets fast as all hell, you realize that once again, Spanish Love Songs is nailing that balance between organic rawness and all that technical refinement that they've only been augmenting since Schmaltz. They're getting better. And even a lot of those little keyboard moments, they actually work, and they were my biggest suspicion going in. From the synth touches on the outro of Routine Pain, to the hint of organ behind Self-Destruction as a sensible career choice, to the piano slipping between the lines on Beachfront Property and Losers, to how so much will drop back to emphasize the painful loneliness on the third verse of Losers Part 2. And sure, there are the expected guitar tones for emo and pop punk, but not only does that accessibility enhance the universality of the themes and tones across the album, say nothing of relatability, but when the anthemic moments hit, like on how Generation Lost crashes into the hook off the blur of cymbals and chugging bassy riffs, or how Kick brings in the brighter melodic touches off the choppy structure, or the huge breakdown off the bridge on Losers that's later mirrored in the bassier progressions on a hook just as huge on Part 2, or how the acoustics and crushing bass left Optimism as a Radical Life choice explode into even rougher tones, where the title track is a testament to every choppy build-up to nail a killer hook. And every moment I'm left thinking that this album might seem one-dimensional in the approach or tone, you get cuts like Dolores that rip everything back to a simmering slow burn ballad, where every moment the band just knows to slow down and breathe for just a second, or a switch up into tones that are even more punishing but still contain more melody. They will change up, they are that diverse, and I'll be honest, it kind of shocks me how many of these songs will stand out for me. And in the end, look folks, by the time I got a solid 8 to 10 listens in, I was looking for the flaws. I'm trying to be a good critic here. I was trying to drill into anything and everything that could be better, that could be different. I mean, some critics have claimed the band is overly earnest, especially with Slocum's delivery being an acquired taste. I know, that's the same criticism thrown at Sage Francis and plenty of emo acts, and it's never fazed me in the slightest, especially when that only enhances the power of these songs, and they don't lean on sentimentality in the lyrics. The only other criticism for which I can see holding any water is that the album can be emotionally exhausting and kind of draining, hitting so many of the same power chords and notes that maybe it doesn't show enough diversity until you pay attention to the details. And often the guitar and bass tones will change up to deliver hook after hook of walloping unique power, and how the song has enough unique detail in the content and melodic composition to really stand out. I will agree it is an emotionally draining listen. Art this raw and direct and targeted so expertly often is, but even that mirrors the hard confrontation with reality that is art that can speak this powerfully with such interwoven cohesion and thematic power. And in other words, look, I had expectations when it came to Dave Cobb and Nick Given the Bad Seeds and Dessa. I didn't have any expectations with this, but Spanish Love Songs measured up. I think it's the first 10 out of 10 in the 2020s, people. Emo and pop punk, they are not genres excluded. They can resonate in that territory, and they don't get much better than this. And as much as I thought that I wouldn't have enough for a full review here, I can only marvel at the potential from a band that's got such a lifeline of hope on their third album, so much coming, and they've really earned all the attention. They're still underground, but prepare to have your hearts ripped asunder. This is a masterpiece worth hearing. Brave faces, everyone. So, yeah, this is really something special. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd really be so grateful. Again, we want to get this, I want to have this appreciated that I actually did a full review of something this special. Please, like, if you want to actually buy and stream the album, links in the description below. I got the poll up there. I'm curious where you guys might fall on this. And again, comments as well. It's something special, folks. It really genuinely is. I'm so impressed, and it just did not, I was completely caught off guard by this. But hey, if you guys want to actually impact my schedule, so see more albums like this, link to my Patreon's right over there, and we can impact my schedule once per week. Happy to have you guys on board. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.